Hey there, history nerds and curious weirdos. Before we dive into today's episode, just a quick note from me, your tour guide through the weirdest corners of the past. You may have noticed that we were a couple of weeks late getting this episode out. No, that wasn't because the archives froze over or because any mysterious volcanic ash cloud blocked the studio. The truth is, I got a little distracted because 2 weeks ago, my girlfriend and I got engaged. Completely being sidetracked by sparkly rings, overexcited family, and just a whole lot of happiness. So thank you for being patient while I was busy living in the real life version of a romantic comedy. But don't worry, history waits for no one, and now with wedding planning mode engaged, pun very much intended, we are back on track. So grab your favorite snack, maybe a celebratory beverage if you are feeling generous, and let's dive right into the past. Hey there, history nerds and curious weirdos. Welcome back to Naked History, where we shine a flashlight into the weirdest corners of the past, and occasionally get snowed in during July. Because today, we're not just telling the story of a strange year, we're telling the story of a global disaster that most people have never even heard of. This is the story of the year without a summer. A time when the sun didn't rise right, the crops didn't grow, the world's weather went completely off script. A time of frost in June, snow in July, famines, riots, cholera, and also the birth of horror literature, the invention of the bicycle, and one very depressed Lord Byron. So put on your best Victorian overcoat, pack a famine-friendly snack, and let's dive into 1816, when the skies went dark, the cold wouldn't stop, and humanity got a reminder that nature doesn't always check in first. To understand the year without a summer, you have to start with a bang. A really, really big one. On April 10th, 1815, Mount Tambora, a volcano in what is now Indonesia, erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded history. And when I say powerful, I mean VEI 7 powerful. That's the volcanic explosivity index, and Tambora is right up there with Krakatoa, Thera, and whatever exploded in your kitchen last time you tried to bake sourdough. The blast killed tens of thousands of people immediately, mostly from pyroclastic flows and tsunamis, but the long-term effects, well, those were global. Tambora spewed an estimated 37 to 45 cubic kilometers of debris into the atmosphere. That's enough ash and sulfur to blanket the sky in a veil of particles. Think of it as Earth getting a new, not-so-fashionable sun hat, one that blocked sunlight and cooled the planet. The ash cloud spread across the globe, dimming the sun and altering weather patterns for years. But in 1816, the impact was biblical. Congrats, Tambora, you've just won the award for least fun vacation spoiler in modern geological history. Now, let's go to Europe. Is 1816, Napoleon has been defeated. The Congress of Vienna has redrawn the continent's borders. Everyone's ready for peace, progress, and planting potatoes. Except no. Because the skies are weird. The air is cold, and spring just doesn't show up. In Ireland, England, France, Germany, and Switzerland, it rained constantly. There were hard frosts in June, snow in July, and hailstorms in August. Farmers planted late only to lose crops to surprise freezes or rots in flooded fields. In the German states, food riots broke out. People ended up stealing bread, burned grain cars, and raided markets. Some called it the Year of the Beggar. Now imagine this. You're in Bavaria, it's July, you walk outside in your summer vest, and bam, snow. So you go back in, you start a fire, and you eat the last of your black and rye bread while your neighbors fight over who gets the soggy turnip. Now, it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was catastrophic. Cereal crops failed. Hay didn't grow, so livestock starved, which meant fewer animals, less meat, no milk. It was a domino effect of scarcity. Bread prices ended up doubled. Famine spread, and with famine, disease came. Typhus outbreaks swept across Europe. In Ireland alone, nearly 100,000 died, not from ash or snow, but from famine and fever. Now let's hop across the Atlantic. New England and parts of Canada also got walloped. The term year without a summer was first popularized in Vermont, where snow fell on June 6th. That's right, snow in June, in the land of maple syrup and overconfident flannel. I mean, I love a cool breeze as much as the next history nerd, but if I see frost on my watermelon, I'm rioting. Now, this frost hit every month of the year in some regions. Crops failed repeatedly. Farmers tried to replant 3 or 4 times, only to be frozen out again. People ended up eating whatever they could find. Reportedly, sawmill dust was even baked into bread in some desperate cases. Now, some of these desperate families abandoned New England entirely, heading out west to what is now Ohio and Indiana. Entire towns thinned out, convinced that the soil had gone permanently bad or that the world was ending. And if you were lucky enough to live in the American South at the time, congratulations. You only got floods, crop failures, and widespread panic. Enjoy. Now, here's where it gets even darker, because this wasn't just a European and North American problem. In India, the monsoon season was delayed and disrupted, so droughts gave way to sudden floods. Crop yields collapsed, and in this weakened, starving population, a new killer took root: cholera. The cholera outbreak of 1817 began near the Ganges Delta. Within a few years, it would spark the first cholera pandemic, eventually killing millions and becoming a regular visitor to nearly every continent. The ash that cooled Europe also destabilized the Indian Ocean. Weather patterns shifted globally. Crops failed in China, where floods destroyed rice paddies in the Yunnan province, and reports spoke of villagers eating white clay and tree bark. So yeah, not just snow in July, this was a worldwide climate event, and it showed us just how connected everything was, even in a pre-globalization world. So stepping out of the despair hole for a moment, because weirdly, the year without a summer also gave us some amazing art. Picture this. It's summer of 1816, and a group of writers and poets, some of the most iconic figures of their time, are stuck in a lakeside mansion in Geneva, Switzerland. The air is thick with unease, the sky is overcast, darkened by the ash of Mount Tambora. It's cold, the rain doesn't stop. You'd be forgiven for thinking this was a scene ripped from the pages of a Gothic novel, but it wasn't. It was reality. These creatives, who had come together for what was supposed to be a relaxing summer, were instead locked in a stormy, oppressive atmosphere, both literally and figuratively. And they had one thing on their minds: how to survive the endless, eerie gloom by pouring out their darkest thoughts onto the page. There, in that dreary cabin by the lake, Lord Byron, whose personal life could rival any of his dramatic poems for intensity, decided that since the sun was failing to rise and the world seemed to be slowly choking on its own existential crisis, maybe it was time to write about the end of the world itself. He began composing his apocalyptic poem, Darkness. It was a bleak vision that imagined a future where the sun was extinguished forever, the earth consumed by famine and despair, and humanity reduced to nothing more than wandering ghosts. His poem opens like this: I had a dream, which was not at all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished. I mean, this is what happens when you get a poet who spends his days staring out a window at the endless rain and snow, drinking more brandy than is advisable, and probably feeling a bit existential. Byron wasn't wrong, though. It was dark, and in his words, haunting, beautiful, and terrifying, spoke to the dread of the moment. The year without a summer was an apocalypse of sorts, and Byron captured that unease with eerie precision. But it wasn't just him. The lady who would go on to be known as one of the most famous authors of all time, Mary Shelley, was also in that house, brooding over her own form of apocalypse. She was a mere 18 years old, and yet she already knew the depth of loss and despair better than most people ever would. Mary, encouraged by the unnaturally grim circumstances, embarked on a literary experiment, a ghost story. What better backdrop for tales of monsters and madness than the world outside her window? There, amidst the swirling fog and oppressive gloom, Mary Shelley began drafting the story that would become Frankenstein. But this wasn't the Frankenstein we know now, a story about a giant monster terrorizing villages. It was a story about creation, destruction, and the very nature of life itself. In fact, Frankenstein can be seen as a direct response to the feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness that Mary Shelley felt during that time. Shelley's monster, Dr. Frankenstein's creation, was being brought to life, only to be rejected by its creator, cast out and left to wander in the cold, bleak world with no purpose. Sound familiar? But it wasn't just the sun that was gone, it was also the warmth of human connection, the kind of connection that Shelley's monster never received. Isolation, rejection, despair, that's what Mary Shelley was writing about, unknowingly shaping what would become the birth of horror fiction. Had it been a sunny, cheerful summer, Mary would have likely been sipping lemonade under a tree, pondering the intricacies of the weather. But instead, the storm brewed inside her as much as outside, and it gave us the tragic, dark-hearted tale of Frankenstein, one of the cornerstones of Gothic horror. Now, you may be asking, oh my goodness, Dylan, how is it that all of these authors were here at the one time, giving us immaculate contributions to culture? But wait, there's more. Let's talk about Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary's husband. A romantic poet who thought the whole thing was just perfect, in the worst way possible. With the storm raging outside, Percy couldn't help but scribble a bit of poetry himself. But his work, it wasn't apocalyptic in the same way Byron's was. Instead, Shelley began exploring themes of the sublime, an awe-inspiring blend of terror and beauty. In Ozymandias, he wrote about the ruins of a once great empire, crumbled to dust by time with only a shattered statue left as evidence of its former glory. It's kind of like an early 19th century version of Here's Looking to You, Every Empire. What a way to deal with the seemingly endless summer of frost, by writing about the inevitable decay of power, the fragility of human achievement, and Shelley was basically saying, hey, if we're all going to freeze or starve to death, let's at least contemplate how nothing lasts forever. Now, somehow, also in this Switzerland lakeside cabin, there was one more member. The group also had Dr. John Polidori, a physician who was traveling with Lord Byron, and while he wasn't exactly the most famous member of his literary summer camp, he did contribute something pivotal to the world of fiction. While everyone else was writing about death, decay, and the end of the world, Polidori decided to write a different kind of monster story, one that would eventually lead to the creation of the vampire genre. His short story, The Vampire, introduced the world to a new kind of creature, one who wasn't about physical horror alone, but about seduction, darkness, and immortality. This wasn't just a creature of the night, it was the beginning of a much more complicated kind of evil, a seductive one that transcended simple bad guy tropes. That's right, folks. Thanks to an apocalyptic summer, we've got the beginning of Gothic horror, Frankenstein, the modern vampire, and a whole new lens through which we see monsters, not just as hideous creatures, but as tragic figures. The cold that seemed to swallow Europe in 1816 didn't just freeze crops, it froze the world itself, leaving its inhabitants searching for a meaning in the void. And yet, even in that darkness, these authors managed to create some of the most enduring, transformative works in literature. They didn't just endure the storm, they used it. They made sense of it. They showed us that out of fear and cold, you can still find inspiration, art, and a story that lingers long after the frost melts away. So, what did these writers do with the English cold and gloom? They took their dark, wintry reality and turned it into art, creating works that would shape the next century of literature and beyond. It was the year without a summer, but for them, it was also a summer that gave birth to a literary movement. Now, I was going to include this next part in our debrief, but I think it's just way too interesting not to include in the main episode. So, some historians credit the year without a summer with helping invent the bicycle. No, seriously. Because horses were dying from famine and food shortages, a German inventor named Karl Drais started working on a Laufsmaschine, a kind of two-wheeled walking machine. It didn't have pedals, but it was the ancestor to the modern bike. Now, imagine pedaling your famine cycle past starving oxen and saying, "Excuse me, just innovating." Now, the effects of the year without a summer lasted long after 1816. Birth rates dropped, migration patterns changed, political unrest flared across Europe in the 1820s, fueled in part by the trauma and displacement caused by food insecurity. And perhaps most importantly, scientists and thinkers began to realize that volcanoes could have global impacts. This was a new idea. Before Tambora, few grasped that an eruption on one island could chill the entire world. It would take decades to fully connect the dots, but Tambora laid the groundwork for climate science as we know it. And what did we learn from all this? Well, first off, we learned that our world is a delicate little snowflake. Our systems, our societies, are all so tightly wound together that one event in one place could echo across the entire globe. The idea that a volcanic eruption halfway around the world could alter the climate enough to spark mass migrations, economic turmoil, and even give birth to new genres of literature, it's almost unfathomable. Yet, that's exactly what happened. But the long-term impact wasn't just about loss and suffering. It changed the way that we viewed the world. It sparked the imagination of writers, thinkers, and scientists who started asking bigger questions. How does one event, like Tambora, alter history? What can we learn from this? And that, my fellow nerds, is the power of history. We may not be able to predict every snowstorm or volcanic eruption, but we can learn to adapt, to find creativity in adversity, and to keep pushing forward, even if we have to do it with a bicycle. Thanks for freezing in the summer with me, friends. This has been Naked History, and I'm Dylan Gassaway, your wool scarf-wrapped guide through history's weirdest winters. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a review. Send it to your nearest weather-obsessed friend, or yell, "Frankenstein was born from fog," into the nearest thunderstorm. It'll understand you, I'm sure. And be sure to check out our upcoming debrief episode for extra trivia, creepy volcanic facts, and This Week in History rundown for the later half of August. Because if we've learned anything today, it's that sometimes July brings snow, and sometimes horrors bring hope. Until next time, stay curious, stay bundled, and if your summer starts suddenly snowing, maybe just start writing a novel. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time.